All right. So today we'll be talking about um, GMOs. GMOs are genetically modified organisms. We'll be talking about what are they, even why do they exist? Why are we talking about GMOs? Why is it important? Is it healthy? Um, And this message is coming, or frequently asked questions about GMOs, coming from the World Health Organization, so WHO. So I'll be reading through what they have to say. This was published in 2014. We'll see what they have to say and kind of assess. So, first, they start by stating these questions and answers have been prepared by WHO. So they prepare these questions and answers themselves in response to WHO member state government with regard to the nature and safety. Oh, so there's questions within their own organization of like, what are GMOs? Let's look at this. And here we are. All right. So the first question is from our frequently asked questions, which seem to be also questions that the public um, is asking or should want to ask or wants to know. What are genetically modified organisms or genetically modified organisms and GM foods? So it explains here genetically modified organisms, also known as GMOs, can be defined as organisms. So these organisms they outline as plants, animals, or microorganisms. So think about that. Those organisms are plants, animals, or microorganisms in which the genetic material, the DNA, has been altered in a way that does not occur naturally by mating or by natural recombination. So basically, by natural ways of reproduction. So they have forced, or that's my words, but forced, no, that's the wrong word. It's another way to basically reproduce other than the natural way to reproduce, whether it's animal, plant, or microorganism. All right. So the technology is often called modern biotechnology. Hmm. So, or gene technology, and sometimes also recombinant, 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 recombinant DNA technology, or genetic engineering, which most people have heard of. Genetic engineering, but all of those mean basically what you're saying. All of those terms mean the same thing. So if you see them, if you read an article in New York Times or wherever you're from, or even um, in a research paper, when you see those words, is basically what they're referring to. It's all the same. Can be it all. It allows selected individual genes to be transferred from one organism to another, also between non-related species. So that's important. So genetically modified GMOs are not only kind of I would say, staged reproduction or unnatural reproduction, but also um, taking that unnatural reproduction process and altering it in a way that is um, ideal. So, mixing basically, they're saying non related species, so species that are not necessarily would reproduce, take having those species that wouldn't naturally do it now do it through the process, um, through an altered process. So, in other words, things that wouldn't naturally occur, kind of making them occur or creating a whole new thing through this kind of biotechnology. Foods produced from or using GM organisms are often related to as GM foods. So again, GM, whenever you see GM or I say GM, that refers to genetically modified. Anytime you see GM, whether it's your day-to-day life, that means obviously genetically modified. So that's interesting. So that's what genetically modified organisms are. So when you go in a grocery store and I don't think it's labeled or it's food in the stores are not labeled whether they're GMO, but they are labeled whether they're not GMO. So it's really hard to determine what's GMO and what's not. Um, they may get into this later or not, but in some times in the stores, you'll see conventional. And I think that's something to look at because could conventional mean GMO or could conventional mean just growing it conventionally, straight, naturally, as far as in relation to produce? So those are the things I'm thinking of as I'm reading. But basically, genetically modified foods are not natural, they're unnatural. All right, so the number two frequently asked question about GMO is why are GM foods produced? Why do we need them? Why bother? Why are they so they're more prevalent than we know. People don't realize you're buying genetically modified foods. Again, they're not labeled, so you don't even know, excuse me, you don't even know that you're buying genetically modified foods, but you are. The only way you know that you're not is whether um, it is labeled non GMO or um, even now that I think about it, can organic foods be non GMO? Because organic just references, I'm going off on a tangent, but gen- organic just means that pesticides are not used, any chemical processes are not used, unless I'm missing a piece of the definition of organic. Write that down. Hold on. Yeah. All right. So I'll be interested to know that, like, if that's part of defined as organic. Um, okay, back to this. Why are GM foods produced? So the World Health Organization says GM foods are developed and marked because there are some perceived advantage either to the producer or the consumer of the food. Mhm. This is meant to translate into a product with a lower price, greater benefit in terms of durability or nutritional value, or both. All right. Wow. Okay. So basically, why are GM foods produced? The first part of the answer is that it's basically meant to cost less. And if it costs less, that's probably because they are able to it costs less to the consumer because it costs less to the producer because the processing is is somehow less than I guess traditional methods of we're talking about foods. traditional methods of growing. So, wow. So you have, I guess, favorable outcomes maybe could be that it lasts longer. They've altered it to maybe whatever it is to last longer on the in the grocery store or wherever. Um, they have altered it to remain perfect. Um, the skin of the food or the fruits or vegetable, whatever it is. So because of that, it saves them money. Well, it makes more money, and then also it saves you money in the fact that it's cheaper for them, whatever however the process is to make, and you probably make a lot more. The yield is better because I imagine if you're altering the process of this food, you know how much you're going to make. This is the outcome. This is how much you're going to yield. Versus with traditional methods of growing, I mean, you have a goal, but you don't know what could happen. What could happen with the soil? What could happen with you know, changes in the environment? Maybe with GMO product, it's altered in a way that it is resilient to a lot of the potential issues. So no matter what, that thing's going to grow and it's going to make it to the shelves, and we know we're going to make X amount, and then X amount comes out of the yield. So lower price to you, which is attractive, and then greater benefit in terms of durability and nutritional value. Uh, I mean, okay, durability we talked about, meaning it lasts longer. You could have normally if you have, for example, what's maybe lettuce. Okay, after a while, um, lettuce wilts or leafy green vegetables wilt, or they start to turn yellow. With a GM or genetically modified leafy green, it may last longer. It may not wilt within a week like a um, traditionally grown or more naturally grown leafy green would. So that is what I believe they're referring to as far as durability. Nutritional value, I greater benefit. I guess they can alter it to kind of fortify it, and fortify just means like they can basically inject whatever they enrich, I should say, not fortify, enrich whatever it is. They can add nutrients to it that wouldn't normally exist. Like for example, um, I mean, this is like cereals and stuff. They add what do they add to cereals? Is it folic acid? I think it's folic acid, and they add stuff to milk. Vitamin D and all types of stuff. So I guess in that respect, you get a greater benefit. So initially, GM seeds developers wanted their products to be accepted by producers and have concentrated on innovations that bring direct benefit to the farmers and the food industry generally. So those developers, I guess they're scientists. Um, they develop these specialized seeds, and they, I guess, are selling it to the farmers like these seeds are resilient, and whatever the crop is, depending on that particular crop, uh, maybe they'll present to the farmers, oh, this is good for you because that issue you have with this particular produce won't happen with this seed because it is resilient to that um, concern, that issue, or that incident. So um, it is attractive for the farmer. One of the objects one of the objectives of developing plants based on GM organisms is to improve crop protection. Basically talked about that. Yeah. The GM crops currently on the market are mainly aimed to increase level of crop protection throughout the introduction of resistance against plant disease caused by insects, viruses. See? Okay, yeah, basically what I just said. Um, but yeah, so those resistance against the disease, I didn't mention that. But basically, yeah, incidents that can happen, which disease, certain insects that can affect the yield. Um, viruses that can affect how much the farmers yield, how much comes out of that crop. So, and then also tolerances against herbicides. Ouch. Yeah. So it goes on to say resistance against insects is achieved by incorporating into the food plant the gene and a toxin production from bacterium. Oh, it's a certain type of bacteria. And this toxin is currently used as a conventional insecticide in agriculture and is safe for human consumption. Is it though? Is it? Hmm. GM crops are inherently produce GM crops that inherently produce this toxin have been shown to require low quantities of insecticides in specific situations. For example, where pest pressure is high, virus resistance is achieved through introduction of gene from certain viruses which cause disease in plants. Virus resistance makes plants less susceptible to disease by such viruses, resulting in higher crop yields. Yeah, basically what I just said. Uh, okay. Well, that answers why GM foods are produced. So we know why. We know you get higher yields. They say it's more nutritional. I guess it can to them. It can be. Um, and what else? I mean, higher yields equal more money, basically. And then in turn be a lower price to us and more money for them. They didn't say that, but all right. So number three is the safety of GM foods assessed differently from conventional foods? Is the safety of GM foods assessed differently? Good question. So it says here generally, consumers consider that conventional foods that have an established record of safe consumption over history are safe. Whenever novel varieties of organisms for food are developed, whenever novel varieties of organisms for food use are developed using the traditional breeding methods that had existed before the introduction of gene technology, some of the characteristics of organisms may be altered, either in a positive or a negative way. National food authorities may be called upon to examine safety of such conventional foods obtained from novel varieties of organisms. But this is not always the case. Okay. I mean, it's not saying much. I mean, I understand what they're trying to say. Well, maybe it'll further flesh out. So, in contrast, most national authorities consider that specific assessments are necessary for GM foods. Specific systems have been set up for the rigorous evaluation of GM organisms and GM foods relative to both human health and the environment. Similar evaluations are generally not performed for conventional foods. There are completely hence there completely exists a significant difference in the evaluation process prior to a marketing for these two groups of food. Are they trying to say that GM foods are, because the question is the safety of GM food assessed different? Oh, well, yeah. So they're saying yes, it is assessed differently. Actually, conventional foods are not assessed at all, but GM foods are. But I mean, the question I really want to know is they're just more so saying why they're not assessed the same. But I don't think that should be a question. They should be really kind of they should be being more clear on what assessment is happening with GM foods, period. Period. Like what is happening there? What are you looking at as far as the safety when it concerns to GM foods? I mean, 'cause yeah, consumers think that growing foods conventional natural. I mean, conventional uh to me means the natural way of growing it, but then now we have terms of organic. It's like all these, like, what do they really mean? Because I can't take it for face value anymore. You can't take it like it's, it notes that consumers consider conventional foods to be safe. But now, what are conventional foods? What do they really consider conventional? What's labeled conventional grocery store in the grocery store? What is that now? Because yeah, so I need to really dive into that. Right. So last part is to the answer of safety of GMOs versus why is it? I mean, not why is it assessed differently? Yes, it is. But let's see what they say. Furthermore, the World Health Organization, the WHO, World Health Organization, Department of Food Safety and Zoonosis, I guess. Zoonosis aims at assisting national authorities in the identification of foods that should be subject to risk assessment and to recommend appropriate approaches to safety assessment. Should national authorities decide to conduct a safety assessment of GM foods, the WHO recommends the use of, what is this? Codex Alimentarius guidelines. I'm not sure what that is. So they're recommending this particular guidelines if the WHO decides that GMOs need to be assessed. I don't even know what they asked. Is that even a question? What? Anyway, moving on. Number four. What is Hold on. All right, number four. How is going back to number three. I mean, I don't like that question. Is the safety of GM foods assessed differently from conventional foods? Okay, I just don't like that question. Like, I think it should be asked, Are GMO foods safe? Are they safe? That's period. Not like are they assessed differently compared to conventional foods? I mean, I guess that's a follow-up question, but I think the first question should be, are they safe? And list kind of outline the reasons why they are and then why they're not. I think that would be more of a frequently asked question than comparing it to conventional foods. All right, so number 4, how is the safety assessment of GM foods conducted? Okay, that's my question. That could should have been number 3. All right, so the safety assessment of GM foods generally focuses on a direct health effects, toxicity, um, potential to provoke allergic reaction. Okay. C, specific components thought to have nutritional or toxic properties. Okay. D, the stability of the inserted gene. Yes. E, the nutritional effects associated with genetic modification. And F, and unintended effects which could result from the gene insertion. See, okay, yeah. So we have these answers now. So what is the result of that? Okay, how is a safety assessment of GM foods conducted? Okay, now we know that they check for these points. And now I want to know what the findings are. All right, so for example, the stability of the inserted gene. How is that how has that been? Is it successful? Is it usually unstable with GMO foods? Um, like I just need some clarification on that. Does it provoke? Does it potential? Does Is there potential to provoke allergic reaction? How's that been with GMO foods? Does it do GMO foods? Are there instances where this happens within GMO foods? Um, is this a typical? Like, what is the research saying? Okay. So moving on, number 5 is frequently asked questions, GMO foods. What are the main issues are of concern for human health? Okay, maybe this is a follow-up to what we just read. Looks like it is slightly. Okay, while theoretical discussions have covered a broad range of aspects, the three main issues debated are that potentials to provoke allergic reaction, gene transfer, and outcrossing. Oh, so they've extracted like the three main out of the basically the safety concerns, and these are like the top three that have actually they've found issues. Okay, so these are the issues that they're willing to share. All right, so as far as provoking allergic reactions, as a matter of principle, the transfer of genes from commonly allergenic organisms to non allergenic organisms is discouraged unless it can be demonstrated that the protein product of the transfer gene is not allergenic. So, allergenic foods can't be non allergenic suddenly through, I guess, the GMO process. Okay. That's fine. So while foods developed using traditional breeding methods are not generally tested for allergenicity, protocols for the testing of GM foods have been um, evaluated by the Food and Agriculture Organizations for United Nations and the WHO. No allergic effects have been found relative to GM foods currently on the market. So, what's the issue there if there's none? I mean, they're saying that basically foods, allergens, foods with allergenic organisms can't be, I guess, inserted into foods that are not. But okay, that's like a guideline for, I guess, the GMO process. But what is the issue there? And then they're saying there's no allergenic effects found. So you're saying there's no issue. I mean, I don't believe it, but all right. So gene transfer from GM foods to cells. I was thinking about something. All right, gene transfer from GM foods to cells of the body or the bacteria in the gastrointestinal tract would cause concern if the transferred genetic material adversely affects human health. Gene transfer from GM foods to cells in the body or bacteria in the gastrointestinal tract would cause concern in the transferred genetic material adversely affects human health. Okay, I get it. Sorry. So basically, whatever they transfer, the process by which they're making the GM foods, um, whatever it may be, when it's digested in your body, then that whatever is in that DNA of or whatever they're injected into this new food, once it's digested in your body, once you eat it, and it goes to your GI tract and it's absorbed. Whatever's in that DNA is now absorbed into your body. So whatever is in there, we don't know, um, can affect you in that way because obviously it's in the you're absorbing that food, genetic material. So let's see. This would be particularly relevant in antibiotic resistant genes. So there's antibiotic resistant genes in the food because, well, it starts in the seed. So that, mm, hmm, used as markers when creating GMOs. So I wonder, you're eating the food now, and say you eat the GMO product, and it has antibiotic resistant genes, then it then transfers to you, and say something happens and you need antibiotics, um, then you will be affected. Your health will be infected. Say the case came around where you needed antibiotics, and now you're now resistant. You can't be treated because of this food, because the absorption of those genes. Hmm. So although the probability of transfer is low, the use of gene transfer technology that does not involve antibiotic resistance genes is encouraged. So you're saying the method, the use of gene transfer technology does not involve antibiotic resistance. So that particular method you're saying is hasn't been a problem. All right. But these are the issues, I guess. The issues are no longer issues. All right. Outcrossing. I'm not sure what that is, so let's find out. The migration of genes from GM plants into conventional crops or related species in the wild, referred to outcrossing. Oh, okay. As well as the mixing of crops derived from conventional seeds with GM crops may have an indirect effect on food safety, food security. Cases have been reported where GM crops approved for animal feed or industrial use were detected at low levels in the products intended for human consumption. Oh. Ooh. Several countries have adopted strategies to reduce mixing, include a clear separation of the fields within GM crops and conventional crops are grown. So basically, GM crops are grown, excuse me, and basically the genes migrate. They don't say how, but I think maybe the soil, the wind, those genes migrate in a way to maybe another area where conventional crops are being grown, and they are basically um, what do they call the term? Outcrossing. So it's not intentional, but it's by they're saying probably by proximity of the field. So one field m- may not seem very close, but close enough to where these outcrossing, yeah, outcrossing happens by wind or um, probably maybe by irrigation, like how the I guess the water flows. Maybe it rains and wind and yeah. So, and I guess they've found in the conventional fields, they found traces of the GM genes in those conventional product that shouldn't have it. So that's an issue. All right, number 6. How is a assessment for the environment performed? All right, so they basically are saying here environmental risk assessments cover both the GMO concerned and the potential receiving environment. The assessment process includes evaluation of the characteristics of GMO, its effect and stability of the environment, combined with ecological characteristics and the environment in which the introduction will take place. The assessment also includes unintended effects which could result from the insertion of the new gene. Okay, noted. I don't know if that like helps anything, but all right, number 7. What are the issues of concern for the environment? Okay, issues of concern include the capability of the GMO to escape and potentially introduce the engineered genes to wild populations. I think that's reference to what is it called? Crossbreeding, outcrossing, outcrossing. Yeah, outcrossing. The persistence of the gene after the GMO has been harvested. All right. I guess persistence of the gene. So is it persistence of the gene, um, like with that can't be without crossing, but like what type, like what happens there? Anyway, the successibility of the non-target organism, insects which are not pests. Oh, so basically, affecting animals or insects there that it was intended for, as far as the resistance goes, how it affects them to the gene product. Yes. The stability of the gene, the reduction in the spectrum of other plants, including loss of biodiversity. So that's important. What I think that means is okay, the reduction of spectrum. So naturally, when plants grow naturally, there's natural things that occur um, in that process. Um, I'm thinking they mean uh, what do you call it? So, oh my gosh. I'm losing my thought. But I think it's having to do with, like, not crossbreeding, what is it called? Pollinization? Like, when bees are, like, are bees gonna be I mean, bees are not pests, I guess. They are basically when they do their job, what is that process called again? Is it pollination? Where the bees kinda go to each plant, they go to plants and they, like, kinda help, these crops breed. If you have a GM product or a GM, crop, will the natural, things occur, like the bee taking the pollen and dropping it at the other plant? Like, is that natural process occurring? Whereas, so kind of natural breeding can happen. What is that called? I don't know enough about that particular process, but I know enough that the bees are important to kind of keep crops healthy, keep it going for generations. Um, so or they reference it as here biodiversity, and I think bees have a lot to do with that diversity, like natural diversity, if I'm reading this correct. And then an increased use of chemicals in agriculture. Yeah, that is a concern. So obviously it's more chemicals to kind of maintain the perfect yield, the perfect crop. um, The environment safety aspects of GM crops vary considerably according to local conditions. All right, so number 8 is, excuse me. Number 8 is, are GM foods safe? Are they safe? Can we eat them? And see what the WHO says. The WHO says different GM organisms, excuse me, different GM organisms include different genes inserted in different ways. This means that individual GM foods and their safety should be assessed on the case by case basis. Okay. And that it is not possible to make general statements on the safety of all GM foods. All GM foods are not created equal. Okay. They're individuals. They need to be assessed as individuals. Okay. GM foods currently, GM foods. Okay. um, Okay, GM foods currently available on the international market have passed safety assessments and are not likely to present risk for human health. So they're saying GM foods are fine over abroad. Okay. In addition, no effects of human health have been shown as a result of consumption of such foods in countries where they've been approved. All right. And they reference back to this Cordex Militaris principle, which we should look up. This is coming up twice. Let's see. Where is it? Oh, CODEXLMENTARIUS principle. All right, so that's that. Is it safe? It's a case by case. What is it? Basically, what did I get out of that? Each GM organism is created equal, and but in the international market, they have no effect. They're not bad. They didn't say they're not safe, but they're not bad. And then they point to this Codex Militarius principle. You know that emoji? Like, okay. 9. How are GM foods regulated nationally? Oh yeah, nationally. The way governments have regulated GM foods vary. Okay. In some countries, GM foods are not yet regulated. Countries which have legislation in place focus primarily on assessment of risk for consumer health. Countries which have regulatory provisions for GM foods usually also regulate GMOs in general, taking into account health and environmental risk, as well control and trade related issues. Okay. In view of the dynamics of the debate of GM foods, legislation legislation is likely to continue to evolve. What kind of GM foods are on the market internationally? GM crops available on the international market today have been designed using one of the three basic traits: resistance to insect damage, number one; number two, resistant to viral infection; number three, tolerance towards certain herbicides. GM crops with higher nutrient content, give examples, which I won't list, have been also studied recently. Okay. What happens when GM foods are traded internationally? The Codex Militaris Commission is the joint FAO and the WHO intergovernmental body responsible for developing standards, codes, and practices. Some standards. So they just go there, girl. That's what I'm seeing. That's what I'm hearing. Just go to the Codex Militaris to find out what the details of the standards and practices are. Okay, so that's basically all the wait. Oh, there's more. I'm lying. Oh, it does outline it. I am lying. Hold on. Principles of the risk. Okay, so here they further and this is online actually. So at the WHO, the WHO website, that's the World Health Organization. Um Here they outline pretty much each guideline. So, for example, the guideline to conduct food safety assessments, like, or I guess is the how to guideline to conduct food safety assessment of food produced using recombinant DNA, foods derived from recombinant DNA, foods produced from recombinant DNA. In plants, recombinant DNA from animals, recombinant DNA from microorganisms. So they have guidelines of how you should do it, or how you should conduct assessment of those food products. Okay. Principles for the risk analysis of foods derived in modern biotechnology. I mean, risk analysis, is that really like, is it safe or not? Or is it just, I guess risk analysis is what could go wrong, but is it saying, is it actually not wrong, but is it actually the issue? Is it actually an issue, or is it risk assessment, which is just okay? Here's the things that could go wrong. Here's the things that could go wrong, not versus saying these are the things that actually went wrong. Okay. So it says codex principles do not have a binding effect on national legislation and are referred to specifically in the agreement of the application of sanitary and some other organization. So they're encouraging members to basically bring together or organize standards with this codex standards. I'm reading ahead. Okay. They list some other protocols and okay. So moving on to number 12. Have GM products on the international market passed the safety assessment? Have they? I think earlier on, one of the questions says the international market for those who are approved are safe. So they're now saying have they passed? The GM product that are currently on the international market have all passed safety assessments conducted by national authorities. These different assessments in general follow the same basic principles, of course, by codex. What has there been? Why has there been concern about GM foods among some politicians, public interest groups, and consumers? Why is the issue? Why do we have an issue with this? So they say since the first introduction on the market in the mid 1990s, so GMOs were introduced in the mid 1990s. Major foods. The first product was herbicide-resistant soybeans. If you notice, soybeans are in everything. I mean, package-wise, packaged food or processed food or frozen food, any food that's in a bag. A lot have soybeans unnecessarily, and other things unnecessarily. But yeah, so that was actually one of the first foods to be genetically modified, it seems, to be herbicide resistant. All right. So there has been concern about such food among politicians, activists, and consumers, especially in Europe. Several factors are involved. In the late 1980s, early 1990s, the results of decades of molecular research reached the public domain. Until that time, consumers were generally not very aware of potential of this research. In the case of food, consumers started to wonder about the safety because they perceived that modern biotechnology is leading to the creation of new species. So yeah, over time, biotechnology can create something new, something that's unnatural, like a unnatural evolution. Excuse me, that's the bulb I'm playing with. Um, hmm, 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 hmm. So consumers frequently ask, "What is in it for me?" I guess do they ask that? What's in it for me? I think okay. All right. So where medicines are concerned, many consumers are. Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. Many consumers are readily accept biotechnology as beneficial for their health. Example, vaccines, medicines with improved treatment potential or increased safety. In the case of the first GM foods, oh wait, I'm reading ahead. Hold on. So going back to soybeans, and then there has been a concern about such food among politicians, activist consumers, especially in Europe. So Europe has a problem with this. Um, why? So the research done in the 80s to the 1990s um, became public. and they were not the public was not originally aware, but then it became public, and then that's oh wait, I read this part. Yeah, consumers start to think about like, okay, is this safe? Now saying that consumers or perceive as safe. Oh, I read that part. Excuse me. What is so then they start to ask, what is in it for me? Which I say, I don't know who was asking that. What is in it for me? I guess is it beneficial? I I guess people would ask that. All right, so they're saying in the case of the first GM foods introduced in the European market, they weren't happy. Um, the products were of no apparent direct benefit to customers, so not significantly cheaper, no increased shelf life, no better taste. So I guess that's what people care about. The potential of GM seeds to result in better yields per cultivated area should lead to lower prices. However, public attention has focused on this risk side of the risk benefit equation, often without distinguishing between potential environmental impacts and the health benefits, public health effects, excuse me, effects of GMO. So people care about, is it cheaper? Can it live on the shelf longer? Does it taste better? And apparently, I guess at that time they weren't getting that. So consumer confidence in the safety of food supplies in Europe has increased significantly as a result. The number of food scares that took place in the second half of the 1990s are unrelated to GM foods. So I guess they had food scares. So then that led them to just thinking that maybe that led them to kind of assess GM foods because they had those food scares that weren't even related to GM foods. But maybe some organization said, "Oh, what about GM foods? Because since we're having these issues, this has also had an impact on discussions about the acceptability of GM foods or not accepting them." I'm jumping ahead in my thoughts. Consumers have questioned the validated, valid, why can't I pronounce words? Validity, validity. Okay. All right. Validity of risk assessments, both with regard to consumer health and environmental risk. Um, Focus in particular on the long term effects. So, people in Europe are concerned. Um, like, how does this affect our health? How does this, my words are slurring. How does this affect our, I need my cough. Okay, hold on. Caffeine is not working. I probably need to take a nap. Okay, so um, how does this affect our health? How does this affect the environment? So, our personal health, our consumer health, and our environment. Consumers have questioned. Oh yeah, read that. Other topics debated by consumer organizations have included um, allergy and antimicrobial resistance. Consumers' concerns have triggered to a discussion on the desirability of labeling GM foods, allowing for an informed choice from consumers. Right, they should. All right, number 14. So that was why has there been a concern for GM foods among politicians, public interest groups, and consumers? Because it sounds like they don't. One, people are questioning, um, is it for consumers, is it cheaper? Is it better? Is it, how is this benefiting us? Um, how is it going to affect our health? They don't feel like they're getting the information as far as um, how it can improve How has it improved them? How has it helped them in any way? Um, and are we getting the information on how it affects us? And so those consumer organizations are pushing, these bigger organizations and, politicians, government to kind of give them those answers. So moving on to number 14, what is the state of the public debate on GMOs? So where are we with it? Again, this is published in 2014. So the release of GMOs into the environment and the marketing of GM foods have resulted in public debate on many parts of the world. Debate is likely to continue, probably in a broader context of other uses of biotechnology, like in human medicine. So I think this was 2014. Now, I mean, I guess it has um, gone to human medicine. Now you can, I guess it's been reported you can change the eye color of your baby before it's even born. Once it's I can't find my words today. Or usually, um, you can change the eye color at conception stage. You can they're saying or testing, or I don't know if it actually has been done, like any abnormalities or any issues with the I guess it's not a baby at that point, but at conception, they can basically extract those issues, or not extract, but like take out what kind of modify um, the I guess fertilized egg or the baby. Would it be the fertilized egg? I don't know what point it would be. Would it be conception, like a fertilized egg, or would it be at a certain stage in the fetus? Anyway, they can make those changes, eye color, whether they take away the disease that they may have or the ailment or whatever it may be. I don't know if they can make them tall or things like that. If they change the eye color, then so you can change those characteristics, and so that is also, I guess, ties into the public debate. Like, does biotechnology from food and GMOs going into, um, human biotechnology or human medicine? So issues are safety, cost, benefits. Going back to foods, the issues with labeling GMO foods, so that what are they saying? So they're saying like labeling GMO foods to address consumer preferences. There are no worldwide consensus to date, so nobody can decide whether we should label GM foods or not. Not we, but they. All right. Number 15, are people's reactions related to the different attitudes to food in various regions of the world? Oh, are people's reactions related to the different attitudes to foods in various regions of the world? Is that even how valid is that question? Okay, the answer is according to the WHO, depending on the region of the world, people have often different attitudes to food. In addition to nutritional value, food often has a historical connotations, and in some instances may have religious importance. Technological modification of food and food production may evoke a negative response among consumers, especially in the absence of sound risk communication and risk assessment efforts. So basically, haven't done enough to communicate the risk and the risk assessment efforts and are not enough, and the cost benefit evaluations seem to be not enough um, as far as other places around the world, not the US. Because anyway, number 16, are there implications for the rights of farmers to their own crops? Yes, intellectual property rights are likely to be an element in debate on GMO foods with an impact on the rights of farmers. So I know there's a lot of debate with the farmers on this debate. It was a lot of mm, issues. I think it was the Farmers Act. I should really read up on this. I mean, on a personal note, because I didn't really like stay connected on the issue. Um, but they're saying so there's intellectual property concerns in regards to GM foods with an impact on the rights of farmers. And there was potential problems with technological divide and unbalanced distribution of benefits and risk divided between developing countries, and the problem often becomes more acute through the existence of intellectual property rights and patenting that places an advantage on stronghold in scientific and technological expertise. Such considerations are likely to be effect on the debate on GM foods. I mean, once a farmer signs on to take GM seeds, a GMO seed, not GMO, GM seeds, sounds like it's a problem. All right, number 17. Number 17 is why are certain groups concerned about the growing influence of the chemical industry on agriculture? Certain groups are concerned about what they consider to be undesirable level of control of seed markets by a few chemical companies. I'm not going to continue. Period. We'll continue. The fear. Where am I? These groups fear that as a result of the interests of chemical industry in the seeds, the range of varieties used by farmers may be reduced mainly to GM crops. So, like over time, GM crops will take over, and then farmers will be dependent on GM crops and basically dependent on these chemicals and then this would impact the food basket of society as well as a long run on crop protection. These groups fear dominant position of the chemical industry in the agricultural development. So it's really changing the industry of agriculture. So these farmers are, if they can't grow, I guess conventionally, or I would not use conventionally because it's confusing, naturally, then they're going to be dependent on these seeds, which is really coming from the chemical biotechnology industry. Um, and so, what did you say? A trend which they do not consider to be sustainable. Okay, number 18. What further developments can be expected in the area of GMOs? So, future GM organisms are likely to include plants with improved resistance against plant disease or drought, or crops increase nutrient levels. So, as far as animals, like fish species with enhanced growth characteristics, so you're eating fish with enhanced growth characteristics, and then you eat the fish. Can you imagine, like, I mean, pause on that. So you have GMOs that enhance the growth of the fish, then you eat it, like they're going back to what they said, once you eat it, you inherit those genes, not inherit, but when the food gets absorbed, you also, it's likely, maybe small traces, but you're still absorbing those genes. So then will you get kind of bloated or enhanced growth? It like reminds me of two things. One thing, okay, so like a few classes before, I think it was the first class, I, I was reading a slide, which, or it was a question about which fish has more mercury, like this big fish over here or the small fish. Um, because the big fish ate the medium-sized fish. The medium-sized fish ate the small fish. The big fish obviously has more mercury. So imagine we're eating all this product, I mean, all this GM product or animals, GM animals or GM fish, and they have this growth enhancement. Then wouldn't that lead us to be slightly bigger when we have that growth enhancement gene, or kind of uh, alter in us, but still maintain the same job or the same characteristic? So, also, I forgot the second thing that remind me of. I can't remember, but that's important to note. So, for non-food use, they may include plants or animals producing pharmaceutically important proteins such as new vaccines. Oh, it's a lot. It's a lot. What has the WHO been doing to improve the valuations of GM foods? So the WHO has been doing two major things. One, on the grounds that public health could benefit from the potential of biotechnology. For example, an increase in nutrient content of foods. They keep on saying this. Decrease allergenic and more efficient and sustainable food production. How, Sway? How? I don't. What? Who who has improved it? Okay, that was number one. Number two, based on the need to examine the potential negative effects, based on the need to examine the potential negative effects on human health of the consumption of food produced through genetic modification in order to um, protect public health. Modern technologies should be thoroughly evaluated if they are to constitute a true improvement in the way food is produced. Okay. I just had to read it again because, okay, yes. You're saying in order to improve, you want to basically keep on evaluating and examining and observing the effects of human health on, consumption of GMs. Okay, but you should be doing that. I don't And I don't know how that improves the valuation process. Am I reading it wrong? Like, am I digesting that wrong? Modern technologies should be thoroughly evaluated if they are to constitute a true improvement in the way food is produced. Okay, that's not like what they've been doing. You just a statement. Okay. Modern technology should do make sure we're safe, or it should improve. Okay, how, what, like what? There's no what there. Anyway, so that is Who Together. Well, this is closing remarks. Basically, the WHO's keeping paying attention on the safety of GM foods in view of public health protection in close collaboration with the FAO and other international bodies. All right. Okay. I don't know. Anyway, that is, I mean, I do know, but I will reserve my thoughts. But it's good to know what they are thinking. Don't think I learned much from this, but it is an interesting thought. All right. So that was the frequently asked questions about GMOs in foods, and GMOs could be in anything. This is just a review. Um, GMOs can be anything. It can be in, obviously, they're using a lot in fish. Um, Grow your salmons to grow, what do people eat? Like tilapia, um, to grow, obviously, various food crops. The initial or the first GMO product that was introduced in the 1990s, I believe, was the soybean. I'm just reviewing things that might be on the exam, but are things that good to know if anybody's watching, or if anybody's listening. Um, but yeah, in the 1990s, there was soybeans, and soybeans were everywhere. They're still everywhere. They're in every product. Um, Man, even in the I'm not gonna go there. Anyway, soybeans are everywhere and everything for no reason. So I see why, because they're genetically modified easily. Yeah. Okay, those are lasting points. All right. Goodbye.